Admissions officers, essay coaches, what was the most pretentious application you've ever seen? Story 1. I was a medical school interview coach, earning some extra money through med school. Some applications were great, others were what you'd expect from kids whose parents are paying a tutor to teach them how to act normal. Our med school interviews are easy to pass, but difficult to do well in. They involve generic questions like your passions or interests, ethical scenarios, decision-making questions, knowledge of healthcare topics, etc. There have been memorable answers to mock questions. In terms of pretentious, I asked one guy what his hobbies were, and he said he loved Armani suits and buying expensive coffee blends. Not a great answer, but what killed it was that he began describing the smoothness of the bean and licking and smacking his lips together with squelching noises. Another applicant's dad was a successful surgeon, so he argued in his answers, "I basically already know how to be a doctor through osmosis." He'd failed the entrance exam 7 times. And his dad opened a lot of doors for him, getting him research editor positions for his CV, etc. There were complex family dynamics. He would say really inappropriate things like, "When I'm a doctor, I can buy and sell you and all your friends. All I have to do is pass this stupid exam and interview, and my dad will get me a spot in the training program. You'll be struggling for years." He'd then flip to complaining for half an hour about how his sister gets treated like a princess and call me at 10 p.m. just to talk. I declined further sessions, but was pretty sympathetic, to be honest. Whenever his dad called to arrange sessions and materials, he was very pejorative toward his son. I had trouble hearing him during one of the phone calls because of background noise until he stepped outside. Later found out that he had been calling Mo, a tutor, during his son's graduation ceremony. He missed his son going on stage to receive his diploma because he was arranging a booking time with me. It placed a lot of his son's defensive behavior in context. And no, he has not been accepted into a med school. That was 2 years ago. And he emailed only a few weeks ago to request access to my Google Drive to brush up on some things. I granted it because when your answer to a conflict in teamwork question is, "I tell them I'm sorry that they're wrong," no amount of Microsoft Word documents will change your performance. It's weird to think about this kid as a person who has never had an original thought in his head, or is too scared to admit to having an original thought in his head that perhaps he could do anything else but be a doctor. What do you think? Pressure from the dad to follow in the family footsteps? It's easy to think that this kid is just too stupid and that he's never going to be a successful doctor. I, however, think if he was given the chance to find a path that he liked, I think he could be very successful at whatever he wanted to do. I think his dad is making him adhere to the dad's vision of success. Story 2. I got to interview some students for a special program in my undergrad. It was highly competitive and lots of people wanted it. Young woman comes in. I offer her a seat. "I'd prefer to stand. This won't take long." "It won't?" "No. My dad is the dean of one of the colleges, and my mom is one of the professors who established this program. I'm getting in." I emphasized that she really should take a seat. She refused again. So I say, "Hey, this interview, me approving you, is part of the process. You have to do well in this to get in. You'll say I did well, or my parents will make life heck for you." Her parents had zero impact on anything in my life, and I told her as much. After articulating this to her, I said, "I'm going to give you a chance to walk out the door and restart this interview. Fresh start." She lost it and yelled at me for like 5 minutes, filled out the interview sheet with direct quotes from her tantrum. She didn't get in. A few days after decisions were made, I got an email from her father, who was, in fact, a dean. He asked me to come in and have a chat with him. It was totally a request. I went to talk to him. When I went to see him, he had a copy of the interview sheet, which had several direct quotes from his daughter. Quotes were awful and directed at me, my family, and basically everything she could hit on. He apologized profusely for his daughter and asked if she could redo the interview. He was leaning on me a bit at this point. I told him that choices had already been made and she was not selected. The whole thing was mind-blowing. She was so entitled. Yeah, and the dad is kind of an enabler. It's scary to think that people can get into the medical field this way. I don't know about you, but it's eroding my trust in our healthcare system. People don't want to save lives, they just want to make a bunch of money. Yuck. It's truly unfortunate. Story 3. Psychiatric nurse, studying for a PhD. Didn't know what dementia is. Having now fully woken up, realized this doesn't really fit the criteria, but may fit the spirit of it, so have left it up. Interviewed a locum who applied for a job in a community mental health MH team that specializes in diagnosis and support for people with dementia. She was a qualified psychiatric nurse with an advanced degree and studying for a PhD. Her CV was impressively full of achievements and innovative work, such as setting up and running a cafe for people with mental health problems, and had apparently got an award for the same. She turns up for an interview with dog hairs all over her dirty clothes, hair unbrushed. This would not have been an issue, particularly if she had actually been able to give a definition of dementia or had known the name of any of the standardized tests. Every mental health professional would know and used at least one. She also couldn't tell me any of the medications used to mitigate the effects of dementia, although there had been a lot of controversy in the news about the National Health Service allowing them to be prescribed at the time. We didn't employ her. Another team did, however. A few months later, she was asked to interview again. My bad. We were very short-staffed, and there were a couple of us going through the myriad of CVs sent by agencies, and the CV showed employment by this other team. I went to get her from the waiting room. She looked up, her face fell, and she just said, "Oh, no." Anywho, because she now had some experience, we interviewed again. Nope. After the interview, I called the other team. She had been so awful, they decided to never employ agency staff again, which was short-sighted of them. A lot of agency staff are amazing, but you need people who can hit the ground running, and therefore I must interview thoroughly. Well, that's kind of unfortunate. We sometimes don't think our attitude is going to affect those around us. This woman's attitude cut off a lot of agency staff from getting a good job with this company. I wonder if the agency knew about this. Did they fight to get back some respect? Were there other agencies that they were looking to interview for hiring? Story 4. This is actually a difficult mom story. The student was a nice kid with decent grades, so an easy admit, but with a very average scholarship. I can see from his app that they are very well off, and they didn't even file the FAFSA, which is a telltale sign that they don't need the help. So a while after I admit the kid, the mom calls me to ask for a higher scholarship. I ask her if her son retook the ACT/SAT since he submitted his app, the only reason why we'd reconsider a scholarship. She says, "Now, okay, so there's no reason for the scholarship committee, aka me, to renew his scholarship then. And it's obvious that she's only asking for the bragging rights. I'm very nice about it, but I make it clear that we're not increasing her kid's scholarship. She goes off on me, telling me that clearly I must not know the quality of the private school he goes to, which I am very familiar with, and that I don't know how much money they have. Her reasoning was that they're rich, so we should give him a better scholarship, and then they'll donate money to the college. Not only did she pull the favorite line, "Do you have any idea who we are?" but she also tried to bribe me with his family financing a new building on campus. Direct quote, "I don't think you understand me here. The school where my daughter goes to has a building named for us. Don't you think my university name needs a new building on campus?" It was the most bizarre and entitled conversation I've ever had with another human. Long story short, I didn't bump his scholarship, and the kid enrolled anyway. Story 5. I used to tutor at uni and helped occasionally with my 2Ds applications. One thing I always encouraged them to do was to mention their aspirations after graduating and to mention why specifically this university. One kid who'd been a pretentious butt the whole time actually wrote in his essay that he didn't really care about the academic part because his dad was just going to give him a job when he graduated anyways. He chose the unis he was applying to based on how impressive they sounded and how good the party life was. I kept in touch with her sister. She was super smart and studied the same subject as me, so I helped her out with career advice, etc. later on. She dropped into conversation later with a noticeable bit of glee that her brother was going through a challenging patch because his father informed him that no, daddy was not going to give him a free ride into a cushy job and did expect him to get a real job. The sister is definitely the smart one, but especially for staying in touch. I've tried to help various younger workers in my field, but it's amazing how many just completely fail to realize how important networking is. Not so much in the, I know a guy who's going to give me a sweet job, but more in the, here's someone who has been where I am and can use the advice. Story 6. Not an admissions officer, but I have evaluated placement essays for first-year writing, first semester, second semester, or in rare cases, tested out completely. I remember reading about how selfies were important because of such reasons as so people can know where you are, and if you travel, you can use them to take pictures of monuments and landmarks. This student essentially, though I'm not sure intentionally, made the argument that every picture that is taken has to be a selfie, and if they weren't in the picture, it wasn't worth anything. I put them in first semester. Yikes. I've read kinda good essays about selfies. In the past, rich people would pay a lot of money to have paintings done of themselves, but now anyone can admire a picture of themselves, and documenting when you feel good about yourself is good for your self-esteem. That's where I thought you were going with this. I think there are good essays about selfies. I even think a good essay about selfies could get you into college. This one was just idiotic, though, and self-important. It's gotta have me in it, or the picture won't have any value. Story 7. I'm a college admissions consultant, and the worst one I've read was a full meta essay about how much the applicant loved college admissions and writing admissions essays. It was arrogant and aloof throughout, but the kicker was when the student called herself an elite applicant with outstanding admissions essay skills right there in the essay. Felt sorry for her because it felt like the stress of the process had given her a Stockholm Syndrome obsession with it. I tried to bring her back to reality gently, but she wasn't having it. She didn't get in. Shocked Pikachu JPEG. Reminds me of the WPST exam I had to take in college. The prompt was about what kind of skills I wish I had. I was halfway tempted to write a snark response of wishing I was better at writing essays based around stupid prompts. But since the test determined my graduation, I didn't want to risk seeing if the grader had a sense of humor. Story 8. If anyone is reading this looking for advice on what not to do, general rules are avoid quotes. It's fine to have idols and talk about them, but quotes take up valuable space in word count, and it's not even your own voice. Better to make a subtle reference to it, or talk about the meaning of said quote and why that inspires you. Also, don't tell me it's a waste of time saying, I went to X for experience, without talking about what you learned from that experience. Otherwise, it's just a meaningless non-comment. Hobbies. Don't just put reading. It's nothing special to say you read as if it makes you different and links into the above point. Talk about what genre, what you've learned from it, and how it will help you going forward in the role. This quote thing is kind of getting to me. Our head of it in high school drilled it into our heads that every paragraph should have a supporting quote. Story 9. My best friend was the salutatorian of her class of 600. She only applied to one college, and it was an Ivy League. She's an upper-middle-class white girl who plays the harp. She wrote her college essay on being a jet setter. It pains me to say that she was completely shocked when she got flat-out rejected. I know a guy like this. Applied to all Ivy League schools, got into none of them, and put in a last-minute application to the state university, which is a dang good school anyway. At least with this case, it helped deflate his ego, and he's super cool now. Hey, there was some good that came out of it. Nice. I'm glad he was able to wake up and have some proper self-reflection. Maybe the stress just pulled off his social mask or something like that. Story 10. I worked in a very religious private school's admissions department for a few weeks, filing applications. The parents had to write a letter about their child and why the school would suit them. I'll always remember the man who wrote 3 pages about how successful a businessman he was, how he owned several businesses, how good he was at the school's main sport, and then attached a large check to the last page. Not a word about the kid. What I remember most? The rejection letter from the principal was a thinly veiled insinuation that bribery was immoral and not accepted at this school. Bribery is not accepted here. Your son is denied. And thank you for your generous donation. It will go towards these worthy causes. Story 11. I was considering making a throwaway, but it seems I will be buried enough to not need it. I read as an admissions person for a competitive national fellowship that helps students study abroad. The last essay I read that day made my job easier, as the person was all over the place, bragging about being a religious hippie, how he writes the best poetry. Everyone considers him a leader. These were all one sentence and intended new paragraphs with absolutely zero elaboration. His closing was literally saying that he could work in the private sector or government when he graduates and the choice is yours. It was like, okay, private sector, thanks. The choice is yours. Story 12. Not an admissions officer, but I was part of an admissions committee when I served as faculty at a wonderful university. One admissions essay compared his act of applying to the law school with that of a Palestinian child facing oppression. The closing line was, "Bravery comes in many forms. A Palestinian child picking up a stone against legal occupation, and me verting this essay, both are comparable." Still haven't forgotten it. Maybe he didn't actually want to go to your school and his family was forcing him to apply. Nobody can sabotage an essay more effective than that. I'd say that's a valid strategy, especially if you have somewhere good to go when you don't get rejected from the college application. If that was the plan, I wonder what this kid's other plan was. You know, the one that involved not going to the gigantic school of your parents' choice. Story 13. I used to do a little recruitment from time to time for a large cruise line based in the UK. I once had an application through where the applicant's CV was literally himself asking himself questions and then proceeding to answer them. It read something like this. So you're probably thinking, who is this guy? Well, I'm a hard-working individual who isn't afraid to go above and beyond. Why go above and beyond, what you say? Well, I believe the customer always comes first, etc. You get the idea. Story 14. Wasn't exactly a coach, but in my junior year of high school, we peer-reviewed each other's essays, and the guy I got paired with, who was sending this to MIT, made the assertion that, "I am an asset to your institution, for when I am wildly successful, I will be sending money back to the school through charitable donations. I will also give your school incredible amount of publicity when I am interviewed by the press." He didn't get in. MIT really lost out on all that free publicity. Story 15. For me, it's the students that disparage the very ones that provide the application support. The kids that bash their coaches for not starting them for X Games or complain about their teachers who give them too much homework. Meanwhile, the Rex and coaches are writing about how great this kid is. Never a good look. Yeah, coach would have put me in the fourth quarter, we would have been state champions. No doubt. No doubt in my mind. Well, there's big doubt on the reader. Especially if that reader gave any advice on how to apply for this thing. I'm pretty sure one of the rules for a successful essay is don't bash your support team. Story 16. Obligatory, not an admissions officer, but my senior year of high school, we read our college admissions essays for our English class. One student's broad topic was admirable. He wrote about ageism and that it was sad that it stopped people from doing the things they loved. Young people should knit, old people should rollerblade, stuff like that. However, the actual bulk of the essay was him describing how much he loved to play with stuffed turtles. He got into a highly competitive university with that essay, but mostly because his parents worked there. Story 17. Not me, but my wife reviews these. In an essay about an impactful event in your life, the kid wrote about being born, like the actual act of coming into the world. Not sure how much of this qualifies as being pretentious, but how much more obvious could it be that one of his parents wrote it? And how mundane is your life that you choose birth as your most impactful event? And how does this set you apart from any other candidate? Story 18. Self. I wrote about how anti-intellectual religion was. I don't even remember the prompt. That was what I was writing about no matter what. Every other word comes as a thesaurus drop-in. Jesus frickin' Christ was bad. It's not about the fedora on your head. It's about the fedora in your heart. Next, you're gonna tell me he was applying to a religious school. You really gotta learn to tell your message to your audience. I bet if this person got into class, he would just spend all his days correcting everybody around him. Story 19. Part of an honors college at my school. One of our essay questions was to pick a word that describes you and why. One kid chose literally because as a kid he had the mental acuity to know what the word actually meant. So when his mother would tell him not to touch his sister, he would touch her clothes instead, and other things of that nature. It's now a running gag within the group. Story 20. I just want to note that a lot of the advice here, don't lie, don't come off as an entitled crazy person, don't be a piece of junk, applies to resumes, cover letters, and job interviews as well. Having done a lot of interviews and applicant reviews for a very well-known dream job bragging rights company, and had my own fair share of reviewing several thousand applications for employees and interns over the years, a lot of the suggestions here are totally relatable to nearly any type of institution that you're applying to. Story 21. I work in IT and had to take an interview for a position in my team. A guy walked in and looked me dead in the eye and said, "You don't look like you know enough to give me a job." I was shocked at first, but then told him politely to sit down and we'll see about it. He didn't realize that the interviews were being recorded. He kept talking like he owned the place and the job was his. He didn't give any right answers. He told me his father was a politician and he would buy his way into my position if he needed. We obviously rejected him. But 2 weeks later, he came with a bunch of goons to threaten me and my project. In the end, the HR and the police were involved to get it sorted. And that was the last interview I ever took. Wow! The guy tried to bully his way into a job? And good for this person to stand up to that kind of behavior. I couldn't imagine having to call the police just because of a job applicant. Story 22. I coach kids on their essays. No, I don't write them for them. I volunteer with low-income kids at the local high school who could make it into school if they had some guidance. They have written about surviving the Haitian earthquake, living in a shelter, living in a car, getting up at 4 a.m. every morning to get all their siblings ready for school, etc. You get the idea. Then I go back to my paying customers who want to write about how their parents spent $10,000 for them to go look at poor people in Rwanda or something, and now they know there are people who don't have it as good as they do. I don't really blame these kids. They don't know what they don't know, but the discrepancy makes me insane. Story 23. I've read some personal statements for UCAS in the UK, and I've read some gems. There was a lad who applied for sports science who said we should let him in because he was an in-store Abercrombie model. And then the child of a celebrity who said we should let him in because they'd done work experience with famous person. I live for reading these statements every year. Story 24. Was reviewing an application and checking the letters of recommendation for any red flags. I started reading one letter that was very enthusiastic about the candidate caring. She is incredibly kind and she can do no wrong. She was made for this profession. How do I know all this? She's my daughter. This girl had her father write her a letter of recommendation. Made my job real easy that day. Wow, really thought they could buy their way in. This kid probably bullied the smart kid in high school to do his homework for him. Well, hope you got all the lunch money you did before, 'cause you're not getting into college. Story 25. I saw someone's essay that was littered with idiotic statements like, can cook minute rice in 30 seconds, probably smarter than your boss, fan of causing drama. Story 26. I went to space camp on a scholarship program after writing an essay to get in. One of the kids in my group, who time and time again proved he wasn't smart enough to write his own essay, bragged about how his mother wrote his and he didn't even want to be there. Messed up on both their parts to take away an opportunity from someone who actually wanted to go. Story 27. Not pretentious, but I had a Chinese student write in their application, I hardly ever waste water, paper, or rice. Presumably, he was conflating economics, the degree subject being applied for, with being economical. He also said that he had found a phone and had returned it to the owner, even though he was Russian. Was he trying to go for Good Samaritan status here? What he really ended up doing was sounding like all the people that passed by the guy on the side of the road, not the one at the end who took this guy up and cared for him. Story 28. I used to help out with auditions for the acting program at my school, and one girl came in with a scented resume. Before she walked out, the head of acting was like, during the interview, do not mention the resume. She was not a good actor. The scented resume was clearly something she thought was cute and charming enough to score her some personality points. Nope. Story 29. Doesn't quite answer your question, but we recently had someone who had rejected for our most competitive course email us. He said that he regretted informing us that he was unable to accept our rejection and he would see us on the first day of the course very soon. At least he had a sense of humor. Story 30. Obligatory, not an admissions counselor, but I was a master's student who helped a family friend's high schooler edit her college admission essay. The prompt was something about the greatest struggle they've ever experienced that made them who they are. Her response? My parents' greatest struggle in life was that I was too academically advanced for my age and I was not challenged enough in school. Yikes. It's just like that movie Mean Girls with that girl doing the trust fall and saying, I just am so sorry everyone is threatened by my beauty. How do you think like this? I wonder if the guy's advice actually managed to sneak in at some point. I think I'd like to hope that this person finally wised up and started behaving. Story 31. Husband of a friend of mine went to a prestigious college for grad school, where his father happened to be an alumni and hold some sort of executive position. Dad not only pulled all kinds of strings to get son in, but he wrote his essay. This guy isn't at all ashamed and loved to mention his alma mater in passing conversation. Story 32. I reviewed applications for a local state college. We didn't need to read essays if the grades were good enough, but one time I saw a kid with an 800 SAT writing score. I had never seen one, so I curiously checked their essay. Their essay was all about getting an 800 on their writing SAT. Story 33. Somewhat pretentious, or perhaps just plain weird, I had an individual offer me money to write an application essay which was about himself. He had to have some sort of spheres. You could write an essay about his massive spheres. That's the kind of deal that could really end up sideways. Wouldn't you have to get to know this person a little better before you could write their essay? I'd say tell them to expect company, and then just judge them for every little thing while charging them. Story 34. A whole essay about how it had long been her dream to study at the prestigious University of Leicester and all the incredible gifts life would bestow on her for living her dream, in an application for a university that was not Leicester. Story 35. Letter simply said something along the lines of, "Let me in X Hall, named after my grandpa. He donated a whole ton of money, so this letter means nothing." He was right. Got right in. Gotta love pay to play. College bribery scandal, but legal. Story 36. As a senior who had just been rejected from practically every university I applied to, this thread is making me feel a bit better. MB, your posts say you got into Berkeley. What are you on about? Be happy. Story 37. I saw an LSAT writing prompt that started with the line, "Hitler had a few good ideas." Really doesn't matter what you say after that. It also had absolutely nothing to do with the prompt. Well, he did unalive Hitler.
Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.